Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jo Bliss, and you're just going to have to give me a minute here to um, get my screen share working properly, I hope, and we'll get started. So, I hope this is fine. I said good afternoon, but it could be happening in the morning. I'm not even sure. But I've been asked to talk a little bit about growing hops, and I'll do my best to do this. I'm not really good at recording myself, so I'm not into the selfie thing. So I will start, and I have a couple of screens going on here. So if I'm not always looking right at you, that's because I'm looking at my next screen. So how did we start growing hops in Emo? And I guess before I start with that, I'll just talk to you a little bit about where we are, and I'll move this up. So we are a University of Guelph crop research station. We're located in Emo, Ontario. If you don't know where Emo is, we're in northwestern Ontario in the Rainy River District. We're about 4 hours west of Thunder Bay and 3.5 hours east of Winnipeg. So we're kind of in the center. Like I said, we're a University of Guelph station. Prior to that, we were with OMAFRA, and I reported to Newliskeard. But now we're with U of G. I report to Winchester. I started working at the station when it was known as Crop Check North, and it was located in Pinewood. And that was in 1988. And then in 1990, our whole station, we sort of outgrew the property we were on in Pinewood, and we moved to Emo. What do? We grow cereals, oilseeds, forages, but we've always dabbled into other projects such as hybrid poplar, miscanthus, and hops is what we're going to talk about today, but among other things. But anyway, let's see. So history on how and why we started this yard. Our local economic development corporation that administers the tile drainage program in the district, we have a good relationship with them, and he keeps seeing this increased land value from us doing all the tile drainage work, and he would like me to challenge producers to grow some higher value crops. Now, they are growing some, a lot of corn here, a lot of soybeans, a lot of canola, but he sees reports of hops and dry beans, edible dry beans, that sort of thing. So he thinks that the research station, which is true, is a great place to sort of highlight some of these crops. As well, Lake of the Woods Brewery, a well-known brewery based out of Kenora, had attended a few events in our district showcasing their products and always talked about trying to buy all things local and support local. So he thought, the Future Development Corporation thought this was a good place to start, and we should start growing hops. So we started in 2017, and there's lots of ways to establish a yard, but as I started researching, there were some really complicated ways to start a yard. So ours is fairly basic, poles and some airline cable. We have 4 rows. I'll just keep advancing here because I think, many ways to design your yard for sure. Now, too far. So in 2017, this is what we come up with for costs to start this 4 rows of hop yards. We have poles, turnbuckles, anchors, clips, the installation of those poles. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Wire, the plants, that includes both years. Like we planted 2 rows in 2017 and 2 rows in 2018 of 2 different varieties. The plants were $840, but if you see what it costs to get live plants to Emo from Southern Ontario, it was worth more than the plants. Mainly the cost was more in 2018 than it was 17. Rope, which is actually string to date, but that's probably a little bit out to date. I don't think I've got the last couple of years charges on there. But anyway, to start that yard in 2017, it was approximately $10,500. What we have in Emo is 40 poles that are 35 feet apart. So the rows are 35 feet apart, 10 poles per row, and the plants are 5 feet apart in that row, and we have 20 feet apart within the row. The poles are 20 feet apart within that row. It's very complicated, but I think you kind of get a picture get an idea of it when you see some of our pictures. So yeah, this is what it looked like the day the poles were put in, and the cable is not up. We had to hire, obviously had to hire all this done. So we had a contractor, a close neighbor of the research station, come in and install these poles. Big talk of the town because they were upside down. The big end is up, but he was concerned, the person that came in said it was dry. So they brought in a little bobcat, did a little bit of post hole augering, and then they used a big high hoe to push the poles into the ground. They're in the ground 5 feet and 20 feet out of the ground. We had marked all the poles so that they're all in at the same level. So that's what it looked like. We did have the building inspector stop by thinking that we were putting up a large pole barn. Yeah, and then I guess we did have to get obviously another contractor in to string the cables and put the anchors in, mainly because we don't have the equipment and for safety reasons. The university don't want students up in any high equipment or up a ladder, that sort of thing. So that's what it looked like pre-cables. Sorry, then this is what it looks like once the cables were up. It might be difficult to see, but the cables are up here now. And the next thing you need to do once you have your plants in the ground is get these strings set up on the cable. Most people use like some type of a lift, but in Emo, we were really fancy and we put some soybeans and some wheat in a pair of socks, and we actually just throw that cable, throw the string over the cable, and then there's what we call a W clip that has a little tool that you just put it in the ground that holds that string, and then the hops climb up that plant. So the hops climb up the string, using bines, and that's B-I-N-E. As you can see here in the picture, a bine is a twinning or climbing plant a climbing plant that climbs by wrapping itself around a support and holds on to rough and downward pointing bristles. So they're actually quite scratchy. And we'll give you a bit of I guess, like a little type of a rash similar to probably a hemp nettle, but maybe not, it doesn't last that long. So yeah, it's bines, not vines when you're talking about hops. So this is what it looks like in the spring when they're ready to climb. Now this would be after the first year, because if you see here, I have an old stem and an old piece of the string that we just cut off and leave for the winter. But these are the bines that we will grab and get on the strings. There's like, so what we'll do is have a string on each side, and then you attach 3 to 4 bines clockwise on the plant. I think there's another picture here. This is what they look like, and you'll just pull 3 to 4 to each side to the string, and you put them on clockwise and they start growing. This normally happens, you'll see this growth, this much growth, end of April, early May, obviously depending on the spring. And you just need it to be long enough and kind of the stem thick enough that they're ready to attach to that string. And most times they do that even before we get out there to do the work. You may have noticed me say clockwise. It has to be clockwise. And if it's not clockwise, they won't crawl up that string. And of course, we had a student test that and thought, it doesn't matter, we'll just put it on whatever way. And that year, the plants, every few plants, because there was a few of us doing it, they kept falling back down. And for whatever reason, this plant grows clockwise up that string. So it's kind of neat. That takes us roughly, not really that long, but the first couple weeks, you kind of go out every couple days just to make sure that they've stayed attached. And you want to also not have more than 3 to 4 bines attached, mainly because it actually, you get too much material and it gets heavy, and you have a, increased pressure of them getting a disease or falling off the strings altogether. So in 2018, this was the spring of 2018, and this would have been early on, just after, I would say it's sometime in May, and we've we've actually mulched, and this is we actually have planted some grass in the rows because we have quite a distance in between our rows. We could easily put in another row between our rows. They're 35 feet apart. But because of the work I've done in the past with trees, I guess mainly hybrid poplar and some black spruce, you never have enough room if you're working with equipment. So we ensured we had extra room. But this is them taking it off. And once they're this far along, there's really no turning back. They're good to go. So this here is just how it looks like. If you see the plant is sort of in the middle, there's three different plants between each row within the row, and then we pull the binds to each side, and off they go up that. And the rope is actually, the string, I guess, is actually a coconut rope. It actually has a nice little fiber that they seem to attach to well. This is early. This is year one. Like, so we planted these first 2 rows in 2017. This is the growth in 2018. And over here, the last 2 rows were planted that year. And generally speaking, yeah, this would have been near the end of June. And they reach that cable for sure by July 1st, but usually the last part of June. Fertility. So fertility, this is actually just the guide that we follow. This is from Like Ontario Specialty Crops Guide, and we follow this for nitrogen. It tells you what you put on for a new yard or an established yard, and you start off with one rate, and then it slowly goes down. And then with phosphorus and potash, we just do that according to soil test, but there are guidelines out there that you can use. Next is, okay, so yeah, sorry, I'm having a hard time advancing these slides, but yeah, so we did use this mulch early on, mainly because it was on site at the research station. I don't know, there's comments that that's maybe not a good idea because it can encourage like mold and mildew. But we had it on site and we were struggling to keep the grass under control. And if you look closely, you may be able to see this is when we were using soaker hoses for watering. I'm going to talk about that a little bit further on. And this is just a picture of them. I usually try to take a picture of when they reach the top of the cable, which is 20 feet up each year, just to kind of compare. But like I said, it's usually the end of June, early July. So this is what we're looking like in 2022. I think this is 2022. They really, really start to thicken up. And you can see this first row here, they're just loaded with cones. I'll give you a close-up picture later on. We have 2 varieties here. So this is Cascade and this is Centennial. Generally speaking, Cascade usually yields higher than Centennial. The reason we went with there's many varieties. The reason we went with those 2 varieties is they were the more common varieties that is used in many beer. So we thought we'd go with the kind of common ones. We weren't doing this. We're doing this to promote the growth and support local. So watering. So like I said, we tried in the early years just using watering cans. Ran a garden hose out there, which was fairly time consuming. If that was our only project, it'd probably be okay, but we have other projects. Tried the soaker hoses, but with our summers becoming hotter and drier, the soaker hoses were not giving them enough water. They tend to like a lot of water, obviously not standing water, not floods, but they do take a lot. If you think about the size of that plant, they do take a fair bit of water. So now we just actually have a tank on the back of our pickup truck, and we drive out there and water each row. We have been trying to do it Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays because the same thing, they probably could take it 5 days a week, but we just have other projects to work on. So it seems to be working okay. Yeah, just another picture. I think this was this summer. They're really impressive. We get lots of inquiries about them because they're right behind our building. Everyone can see them. And they're a beautiful plant. So some people will come in wanting, really interested in growing hops, but some others will just want this plant because they think it'd be great in their yard. And I think it probably is great in your yard, but I think it will end up being a weed because it really likes to grow. So here's a problem. Like this is some early growth where we've already got the vines started, but then we have all this other growth down below that really should be taken care of, but it requires work. We either have to go out there with some shears, really now what we do is I wait till it gets enough growth, and sometimes I'll take a whippersnipper, which tangles the whippersnipper up, or the lawnmower. Or I also think it would be a great project to start having some, that's not going to happen at emo. I joke about this, but it'd be a great project to have some sheep do the trimming, because once these guys are going, they probably won't bother that vine, but this young new growth, they might. So maybe that's a project in the future. Yeah, this is just again this year, how high they were. We had a fairly hot year, and me and the students didn't think that they were as great as some years, but there was still a lot of seed or a lot of cone at the end of the year. I guess it's not seed. I shouldn't say that, it's cones. So here's a picture of what a hop looks like. They actually, to me, if I could describe it to you without being there to show you, they look like a green spruce cone. They're actually really light, and they have a fairly strong smell, and there's quite a difference between varieties on how they smell. Harvesting, so obviously harvesting can be a pretty big job. So in the early years, we just actually set up in the shop, brought the plants in, and asked, community members and friends to come and pick plants, or pick hops, I'm sorry, off the vines. So here's a few bags. This particular fella, and I think this next slide, this group was all down from Lake of the Woods Brewery, and we picked a bunch of hops, and they took them actually back to Kenora wet, and they did a wet brew. So I don't know, and you probably didn't get to try it, but it was called North of the 49, and they did a wet brew, and it was, exciting for them, exciting for us. But future development then understood that picking the hops by hand is fairly time consuming. And they applied for some funding, and they actually purchased us this hops harvester. So I'm hoping this will work. Of course, when I was trying to find pictures to share with you, I couldn't find them all. So this is just an Instagram post that I had, and hopefully it'll open, and then I will explain to you how it works. We'll get out of there, and here we go. So this is just the hops harvester, and we hook the vine on to a small little cable, and it pulls it through this machine, and the hops come out a little conveyor on the side. So I'll just maybe play it one more time. So we've hooked this onto a cable on the side. It runs through a bunch of little beaters, and the hops comes out there on the side. But that was the best post that I could find for showing you what the harvester does. They also bought a baler, which is just I got to get out of there now. Just plastic, just like those plastic compactors that Nofia, I think, had helped with sponsoring to compact the farm plastics. The balers like that, we've only used it an odd time, and because most of our hops have went wet to the brewery. So like I said, we've supplied Lake of the Woods. A lot of local people that are brewing have come and picked up hops. We supplied some of the vines for crafting. As you can imagine, they're kind of like similar to a grapevine. We've had a few people, there's supposed to be some sleep benefits, and they've picked them up to make pillows. They're supposed to be a sleep aid. And last year, we actually have a new brewery in Fort Frances, and they're using our local hops. We have not been selling our hops because we're still promoting this. And eventually, maybe we will. How much, I feel like I'm going to talk about that. But I think if you're talking about how much they're worth, I think they can be anywhere from like $3 a pound up into the $30 a pound. The two varieties that we have, I would say maybe around $6. But again, it's just like any other market. I think it varies. And but if you're talking with somebody that wants to use all local, I think there's more value to that. So we actually have 2 other yards established in the district. So we are excited about that. And yeah, so what can go wrong? Wind can be a problem, disease, though we haven't had a whole bunch at the station, and dry years and drought is a problem because, like I said, they like water. This picture here, we were preparing for our open house, and the hops were looking pretty sharp. Grass was all cut, everything was all tidy, and we had like a big strong wind burst over lunch. We came back out after to continue our work, and a bunch of these plants had blew down. So we tried to think we tried to string them back up ourselves. If you would have had a lift, that could have happened. But since we're not doing this, for financial gain, it wasn't worth us renting a lift to put them back up. We did leave them, and we still got some growth off of them, because this would have been the beginning of August, and normally you would start harvesting around the beginning of September. So we got some hops off them, but not as many as we would if they would have stayed up. Yeah, some of the uses of hops. Yeah, early spring, they can be cooked up like asparagus. I mentioned already the pills for an aid to sleep, the wreath idea, and they can be used as an exfoliant in soap. And they're talking about some medicinal purposes with some of the new varieties and the new properties they're finding out about hops. And of course, probably the main one is beer. And that's what makes everybody excited, because everybody wants to grow something to make a beer. So another little bit just quickly about the growing information. It's a perennial plant. It dies back to the crown every fall. We cut ours off. We leave usually about a foot or so of stem. But we've had no problems with overwintering. And like I say, they actually become a bit of a weed. It takes 3 years for the plant to be fully mature, but they can live forever. We can take some rhizomes off of these plants at our yard now and plant elsewhere if we wanted. And yeah, depending on the variety, you can expect 1 to 2 pounds per plant of dried product. So yeah, they actually yield pretty, like, even though when you hold a bag of hops, you don't feel like you've got that much there. It actually is fairly heavy when you're all done. Yeah, so this is just a shot. This is probably when we were in harvest, because this row is completely gone. This pretty shot at the research station. And then just, yeah, thank you for having me. Of course, I'd like to thank the University of Guelph for allowing us to have this, what I would call a locally approved project, and then future development for their support. And Nofia also has contributed to our yard. And of course, to my students, because they do a lot of the work. I do find that the students quite enjoy the hop yard, not only because it makes beer, but it's kind of a fun project. So if you have any questions, reach out. I really didn't start off knowing much about hops, but I reached out to, there's so much information, obviously, on the web. And, I reached out to some growers locally in Manitoba. I found them on Twitter, or X, I guess, and people were certainly really helpful. I am not an expert, but I would certainly help you. And like I say, we have 3 yards now, and yeah, and there's still lots of interest. So I would not be surprised to see more yards. So thanks. And if you have any questions, certainly reach out. I hope you have a good rest of your meeting.